Hello, this is Ipswich Vineyard Core Community's fourth video, the core community I'm running. This one's about John 4. We're looking at, well, the general sort of theme I'm trying to bring out is Spirit of God, Spirit of Religion, but we're just really looking at the text and seeing what we get from it. John 4 is a really excellent chapter. We'll mostly focus on the woman at the well, and it's very, very interesting, basically. So this is a big contrast with John 3. In John 3, Jesus had met Nicodemus, and he'd had Nicodemus had come to him at night. Well, in contrast, this is during the day. Jesus is talking to a Samaritan rather than a Jew. Obviously he's talking to a woman rather than a man. She seems probably quite poor and maybe of low status, whereas Nicodemus seems to have been quite a high status religious leader. Jesus approaches the woman. I think it might be interesting to bear in mind the people who approach Jesus in this gospel and the people Jesus approaches. In John 3 it was Nicodemus who came to Jesus, but in this story it's Jesus who goes to the woman. He says it's necessary that I go through Samaria, and a lot of people have commented that it isn't, from a journeying point of view, he didn't have to go through Samaria, but he chose to go through Samaria, and he really seemed to have in mind the fact that he wanted to have this conversation with this woman. So Jesus asks the woman for something, to get him some water, and Nicodemus seems to want something from Jesus. He says, your prophet come from God. But both take Jesus' words quite literally. The woman tends to be a lot more positive. She welcomes what Jesus says. Nicodemus, he only says three things. The first one is, your prophet come from God. Jesus talks about being born from above, and Nicodemus says, how can anyone be born a second time, going into their mother's womb? And then when Jesus explains further, Nicodemus says, how can this be? So he's sort of got a questioning response to what Jesus is saying, although subsequently in the Gospel of John he does seem to be probably a follower. In John 7 he defends Jesus when he's accused by the religious leaders. He says, do we condemn someone before we've heard him? And when Jesus is buried, he goes with Joseph of Arimathea to the tomb of Jesus. So it does seem as if subsequently he followed Jesus. As I say, the woman, Jesus, very important, Jesus commissions the woman to go and tell her husband. I believe it's the first commission in the Gospel. I don't think he's told anyone else to go and spread it, the good news. Often in the synoptic Gospels, in Mark in particular, he specifically tells people not to say about him, but this woman he says to go and tell. So again, like a very important thing. The woman features way more times. Nicodemus' name appears 3 times. The word woman in the conversation appears 12 times, and this is, I think by far, this is the longest conversation. The woman at the well is the longest conversation Jesus has with anybody, and I suspect if you add up all the statements, it's the longest by far. I mean, obviously he does have long speeches, he has like the Sermon at the Mount, and in Gospel of John there's the talk in the upper room, but these are pretty much sermons, as it were. This is a conversation. It's a long conversation that he has with this woman. So again, really emphasizing the importance of this episode as just how long it is, and how many exchanges there are between him and the woman. And as I say, it is the longest conversation Jesus has with anybody. So there seems to be a contrast between the meeting with Nicodemus in John 3 and the meeting with the woman in John 4. One important feature is the time of day. Now, a lot of people, if you've heard people talk about this story before, they often talk about the fact that Jesus appeared at noon and that this was a strange time, and because the woman was at the well at noon, it meant she was like excluded, that she was some, people didn't like her, or she was some sort of, had some bad thing about her because she was at the well at noon. Well, this assumes that the Gospel of John uses Jewish time, and that's just wrong. So all this stuff about this incident happened at noon is not right. It happened at 6 in the evening. The Gospel of John uses Roman time, and we are quite clear about this because in John 19 it refers to the 6th hour. Right? The Roman time is like our time, so the 6th hour is 6 in the morning, the 7th hour is 7 in the morning. Jewish time starts at 6 a.m, so the 6th hour is noon. Right? So when the text says the 6th hour, we're asking, does this mean noon or does this mean 6 in the morning? Now, when Jesus is tried in the Gospel of John, it says that he was sent before Pilate at the 6th hour. Now, all the other Gospels say that by the time it was noon, Jesus was already crucified, and it's actually the 6th hour, that it's noon when there's a darkness descends from noon until 3 in the afternoon. So there's no way that the Gospel of John is saying that at the 6th hour, Jesus, in other words at noon, Jesus was before Pilate. It's using Roman time to say that at the 6th hour, which is 6 in the morning, he was before Pilate, and so therefore there's obviously a lot of other things got to happen after that before he's finally crucified, and then that fits much better with the timeline of the other Gospels. And just to sort of confirm that, I mean, you can see this in other places. In John 1:39, it says that Jesus met with some disciples at the 10th hour, and that he said he'd stay with them that day. Well, that's fine if you were talking about Roman times, Roman time, because that means it was 10 in the morning. Jesus turns up, meets some people at 10 in the morning and says, I'll stay with you all day. If he meets them at 4 in the afternoon and says, I'll stay with you all day, that's not really all day. So it's quite clear from, if you look at the references to time, and the same thing with the time later on in John 4:52 with the walk from Cana, the Cana to Capernaum story. It's also clear that that's Roman time. So when it talks about the 6th hour of the woman at the well, that's 6 in the evening, which is a normal time to appear at the well. And it doesn't even say that she was the only person there. It just says when she went to the well to draw water, Jesus spoke to her. It's perfectly possible that there was other people there as well, and as she went to the well to draw water, Jesus spoke to her. We're not told about anybody else there, but at the same time we're not told there wasn't anybody else. And as I say, 6 in the evening was a normal time for going to the well and drawing water. So there's nothing unusual about that. We shouldn't think, there was something strange or bizarre about her. She probably did have, I would suggest it's likely maybe she had a lower social status because of the marriage situation, which we'll come to, but the time of day is 6 in the evening, it's not noon. So the well. So the well is associations of men meeting women. There's lots of places in the Bible where people go to the well. I mean, usually a woman, probably in the ancient world, would have stayed within the home, but there are occasions when it was often women who went to the well to draw water. So Abraham's servant stopped at a well and met Rebecca there in Genesis 24. Jacob met Rachel at a well when she came to water her father's flock of sheep. Moses met his future wife Zipporah at a well. She came with her sisters to water their father's flock. So, and these are all kind of betrothal scenes as well. So they're occasions that we've seen in the past in the Bible in which men meet women at the well, and so Jesus meeting a woman at the well kind of fits in with that sort of tradition. And also Saul meets some women at the well, and just to show his kind of he's not sort of the big hero, when he goes to the well to talk to some women, it's because he's lost some donkeys and he's asking them where the donkeys are, and so that sort of makes him a slightly ridiculous character. Whereas the as I say, Abraham's servant and Jacob and Moses went to the well when they were looking for wives. When Saul goes to the well, it's because he's lost his donkeys, and it sort of makes him maybe a slightly comical or ridiculous figure. I wondered whether the term woman, obviously one of the differences is we know Nicodemus's name, we don't know the woman's name, she's just referred to as the woman. But it made me think of the story of the fall, because when in Genesis 3 we read about the fall, it references the woman did this, the woman did that. And Jesus is sometimes described as the second Adam. And so you might think, well, in the story of the fall, the woman eats the fruit of death. But now the second Adam, Jesus, is offering the woman the water of life. So there may be kind of overtones of the sort of reverse of the fall, where the woman and Jesus makes us think back to Adam and the woman in the garden. We have to remember also that women have been marginalised and excluded from society in the ancient world and up to the present day, and Jesus really often seems to be challenging this exclusion and acts to radically include people who society has left out. And very often, because people have lived in a society which has marginalised women, then the people who comment on the Bible and interpret the Bible bring those sorts of cultural assumptions to their interpretation, and very often you get very pejorative interpretations of a woman's role in something that wouldn't be ascribed to a man. The sort of example would be Bathsheba. A lot of people say, oh, it was Bathsheba's fault that she tempted David, and there's nothing in the text to suggest she did anything wrong. She's never punished. There's never a word in the text that reprimands her or says she did anything wrong. It's always David's sin. But hundreds of years of people go to that story, and it's victim blaming, basically, isn't it? There was a powerful man, the king, forcing a woman to do whatever he wanted because he was the king, and yet somehow it's still the woman's fault. And sometimes people hear this woman really is treated very well by Jesus, and talks for a long period of time to her, commissions her to go and tell about him, and yet there's plenty of commentators will try and add in how bad she was, how sinful she was, and there's nothing in the text to suggest it. There are people in the Gospel of John where Jesus does say, like, go and sin no more, or don't do this, don't sin anymore, or whatever, but he doesn't say that to this woman. So I think people get some of their assumptions from culture rather than the Spirit of God, which seems to me, we just have to be conscious of what we're bringing when we're interpreting some of these stories. Let's get to the issue of the marriage, because Jesus does call her married. I mean, he says, go and tell your husband. So there's the question, was he testing her? Was he trying to catch her out? Why would she have been married 5 times? Because, of course, this then opens up, she confesses that she's not married, the man she's living with isn't her husband, and that she's had 5 husbands. You have to remember, in the ancient world, a woman couldn't initiate the divorce. It's the man, the woman is literally the property of the man, and the man would issue a certificate of divorce for a woman if he had various grounds. And in fact, by Jesus' time, there was a thing called the any cause divorce, in which just anything a woman did to displease her husband, he could say, right, well, I'm divorcing you then. So we think we need to think of her here as pretty much the victim. If she has been divorced 5 times, and it may be that the husband had died as well, but obviously that wouldn't really have been her fault either. So and the other thing is, it may be that the last husband didn't issue a certificate of divorce. If he'd have just sent her away without the certificate of divorce, she wouldn't have been able to marry again. So, you know, Jesus, by saying, go and tell your husband, referring to us in effect as married, may just have been, you know, that he didn't want to talk to her as if she'd got a loss of status by that way. It just seems to me highly unlikely that she really had a part to play in this, given that the status of women in the ancient world. If she'd been divorced, or she'd been married 5 times, well, she certainly couldn't have initiated a divorce, and like I say, it wouldn't have been, none of this would have been her fault. So it was just very unfortunate that this sort of thing had happened to her. And, you know, it could be that if the husband hadn't issued a certificate of divorce, she just couldn't get married again. And obviously, economically, she probably did need someone to provide for her. So I feel Jesus treats her very positively. And it's also quite a sad comment when she goes to the town and says, "See a man who told me everything I ever did." Well, the everything I ever did was getting married and losing her husband. So her whole life has been a series of marriages and separations, or divorces, or deaths, or whatever, which is quite sad. But nevertheless, Jesus really gives her hope, and gives and you know, when he talks to her about the water of life, and offering her those who are come, and the time has come, and will come, and has now come, when those who worship God will worship him in spirit and in truth, when she starts to ask him questions about whether it's better to worship at the Samaritan's temple or the Jewish temple. So Jesus really gives her a lot of good teaching that I'm sure she was very blessed by, and you know, it's a really very positive story, I believe, as to the way Jesus engages with this woman. And you know, by the end he talks about the harvest, and you know, many people come from the town and believe, and it really sort of sets a pattern in a way, that in the book of Acts we often see the apostles going to the Jewish synagogue and getting kicked out, and you know, having often, you know, the Jews try and make trouble for the early Christians, and the apostles then go to the Gentiles, where they're much more welcomed, and they usually get a much more positive response. And it seems here as well that Jesus goes to, you know, a little way outside of the Israel, the Jewish lands, goes to Samaria, and immediately gets a really good response. So it shows that there were people willing to listen to Jesus and willing to respond positively, even if it wasn't going to necessarily be the Jewish people. We didn't spend too much time on the second story in John 4, which is about the healing of the servant. It's there's a sort of an interesting thing in that I think the text, there's various translations. I think, you know, some of them say government official, but I think a better translation is that it was like a royal official. Is that in I think it's Luke, certainly in one of the Synoptic Gospels, they have a list of women who financially support Jesus and who follow him, and one of them is the wife of a royal official. And so there's some talk that possibly the boy who was healed in the story in John 4, the guy's wife later on became a follower and financial supporter of Jesus. And incidentally, it's 20 miles from Capernaum to Cana, if you can put it on Google Maps and you can say how far, and apparently it takes about 7 hours according to Google Maps to walk from one to the other. So it was a bit of a trek that he'd done to go all the way from Capernaum to go to Cana, and I guess it was good that he just trusted Jesus, who'd said, you know, your son is healed. And again, it shows the importance of faith. So yeah, there we are. That was the sort of things we discussed in John 4. Hopefully that was interesting for you. And we'll do John 5 next week.